She was fired for being late, but ended up saving her boss's life. Rachel Morgan held the envelope with trembling hands as she walked through the hallway of the accounting firm Morgan & Associates, located in downtown Charlotte. 6 late arrivals in 1 month. The words of director Stephen Morgan still echoed in her mind like a final verdict. It didn't matter that she had worked there for 4 years with exemplary dedication. It didn't matter that her reports were always impeccable. The cold and calculating man who ran the company had decided that punctuality was more important than quality. "Mrs. Rachel cannot be late anymore," he had said, with that mechanical tone he used for everything. "This is your termination letter. You can collect your things and leave." She had tried to explain about Mrs. Dorothy, her 73-year-old mother-in-law who had advanced Alzheimer's, the weekly medical appointments, the medications that needed to be administered at the correct times, the episodes of confusion that always happened at the most inconvenient mornings. But Stephen Morgan had interrupted her with an impatient wave of his hand, as if swatting away an annoying fly. Rachel stopped in front of her desk in the finance department, looking at the few personal belongings she needed to collect. A mug with a sunflower pattern that her late husband Daniel had given as a gift on their last wedding anniversary. A small photo where she smiled next to Mrs. Dorothy on an afternoon in the park, and a small notebook where she wrote reminders so she wouldn't forget anything important. Simple objects that told the story of a life dedicated to work and family. Her co-workers avoided looking directly at her. Some whispered among themselves, others pretended to be too busy with their computers. Rachel knew that behavior well. Nobody wanted to associate with someone who was being let go, as if the situation could be contagious. Only Jennifer, the younger receptionist, had the courage to approach. "Mrs. Rachel, I'm so sorry," she murmured, looking nervously around. "Mr. Stephen shouldn't have done this. Everyone here knows how hard you work." "Thank you, dear," Rachel replied, forcing a smile. "You keep doing your job right. Don't worry about me." But inside, Rachel felt a whirlwind of emotions. Anger at the injustice, worry about her financial future, anguish at leaving a company where she had built a routine that helped her deal with the difficulties at home. How would she get another job at 42, especially with the responsibility of caring for Mrs. Dorothy? She was putting the last item in her bag when she heard a strange sound coming from the director's office, a dull noise, as if something heavy had fallen to the floor. At first, Rachel hesitated. She was no longer an employee of the company. Technically, she shouldn't interfere with anything. But the caregiver instinct she had developed over the years spoke louder. The hallway was empty as she approached the slightly open door of Stephen Morgan's office. Rachel pushed the door slowly, and what she saw made her completely forget about the termination, the anger, and any resentment. Stephen was lying on the waxed wooden floor, his face pale and his breathing irregular. His hands were clutching his chest and he was making muffled sounds of pain. "My God," Rachel murmured, running to him. All the knowledge she had acquired caring for Mrs. Dorothy, who besides Alzheimer's suffered from diabetes and heart problems, came to the surface automatically. She quickly checked Stephen's pulse, feeling the irregular and weak beats. "Mr. Stephen, can you hear me?" she asked, kneeling beside him. Stephen tried to speak, but could only manage to groan. Rachel noticed her lips were beginning to turn blue, a sign she recognized from the episodes Mrs. Dorothy had already faced. Without hesitation, she began to apply the chest compressions she had learned in her first aid course. Her hands found the correct spot on Stephen's chest, and she began the rhythmic compressions. 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths. 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths. Sweat began to stream down her face as she maintained the steady rhythm. "Somebody, please, somebody help me," she shouted, without stopping the procedure. Jennifer was the first to appear at the door, followed by other employees who crowded the entrance with expressions of shock. "Jennifer, call EMS now. Tell them it's a heart attack," Rachel commanded, keeping her full concentration on what she was doing. "And the rest of you, move away from the door to let the air circulate." Brian, the head accountant, approached nervously. "Mrs. Rachel, are you sure you know what you're doing? Maybe it's better to wait for the doctors." "We don't have time to wait," Rachel replied, continuing the compressions. "He's in cardiac arrest. Every second counts." The minutes felt like hours. Rachel felt the muscles in her arms burning, but she didn't stop. She had seen Mrs. Dorothy go through two similar situations, and both times the speed of the response had been crucial. Stephen began to show signs of improvement, with his breathing becoming more regular and color slowly returning to his face. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. When the paramedics arrived, they found Rachel still applying the procedures with technical precision. The doctor leading the team quickly observed the situation and nodded approvingly. "You did an excellent job," he said, taking over the care. "So you may have saved his life." As Stephen was placed on the stretcher and taken to the ambulance, Rachel sat in a nearby chair, feeling her legs weak from the adrenaline. Only then did she realize what had happened. The man who had fired her half an hour earlier was alive thanks to her intervention. Jennifer approached with a glass of water. "Mrs. Rachel, you were amazing. How did you know how to do all that?" "I learned from taking care of my mother-in-law," Rachel replied, sipping the water in small gulps. "She has heart problems besides Alzheimer's. I've had to help her a few times." Brian approached, looking embarrassed. "Mrs. Rachel, we all know Mr. Stephen fired you today, but what you did, that was very generous." Rachel looked at him calmly. "I didn't do it out of generosity, Brian. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Regardless of what happened between him and me, no one deserves to go through this alone." The following hours passed in a confusing blur. Rachel ended up following the situation at the hospital, even though she wasn't sure why she was there. Perhaps it was her caregiver instinct, or maybe a need to know if her efforts had been worth it. She called the neighbor who looked after Mrs. Dorothy in emergencies, explaining that she would be home late. At City General Hospital, Rachel waited in the waiting room along with other employees who had shown up. The tension was palpable. Stephen Morgan, however difficult a boss he was respected professionally. The company relied heavily on his decisions, and everyone knew his absence could bring complications. Around 7 in the evening, an elegant woman with graying hair appeared in the waiting room, visibly worried. Rachel recognized her from the few times she had seen photos on Stephen's desk. It was Elizabeth Morgan, his wife. "Are you all Stephen's employees?" she asked, approaching the group. "Yes, ma'am," Jennifer replied respectfully. "We've been here since he was brought in." Elizabeth observed every face until her eyes settled on Rachel. "Are you the person who saved my husband?" Rachel nodded timidly. "I just did what anyone would do in that situation." "No," Elizabeth said, sitting beside her. "The doctor told me you performed CPR perfectly, that you remained calm and coordinated everything until the EMS arrived. That's not something just anyone would know how to do." Rachel explained again about her experience caring for Mrs. Dorothy, about the first aid course she had taken, about the emergency situations she had already faced. Elizabeth listened with growing attention, asking questions that revealed sharp intelligence and a sensitivity Stephen clearly didn't possess. "My husband fired you today?" asked Elizabeth after hearing the full story. "Yes, ma'am. 6 tardies in 1 month. I tried to explain about my mother-in-law, but he wouldn't listen," Elizabeth completed with a heavy sigh. "My husband has many qualities, but patience and understanding aren't among them." The doctor appeared shortly after with good news. Stephen had suffered a heart attack but was stable. The procedure Rachel performed had been crucial to preventing further damage to the heart muscle. He would need to stay hospitalized for a few days for observation, but the prognosis was positive. Rachel was preparing to leave when Elizabeth gently held her arm. "May I speak with you for a moment?" They moved to a more private corner of the waiting room. Elizabeth seemed to be organizing her thoughts before speaking. "I'd like to know more about your situation at home," she said finally. "About your mother-in-law, about how you manage everything." Rachel hesitated. She wasn't used to talking about her personal life, especially with someone from her former boss's family. But something in Elizabeth's expression encouraged her to continue. "Mrs. Dorothy has been with me for 3 years, since my husband passed away," Rachel began. "She has no one else, and I couldn't put her in an institution. But caring for someone with Alzheimer's is challenging. especially when you need to work to pay the bills. Elizabeth listened with full attention, occasionally asking questions that showed she genuinely wanted to understand the situation. Rachel found herself talking about things she rarely shared with anyone. The sleepless nights when Mrs. Dorothy had confusion episodes, the expensive medications that consumed much of her salary, the loneliness of carrying all that responsibility alone. "And you took nursing courses?" asked Elizabeth. "Nursing technician a few years ago, but I never worked in the field. When I married Daniel, he said I didn't need to work outside, that he earned enough for both of us. After he passed and Mrs. Dorothy came to live with me, I found I needed to use that knowledge every day." Elizabeth became thoughtful for a moment. "Does Stephen know you have nursing training?" Rachel shook her head. "He never asked. The company file only shows high school education. He hired me to organize documents, not to care for people. But you organized the financial documents, didn't you?" "Yes, and I also handled accounts payable and receivable, file organization, some spreadsheets." Rachel stopped talking, realizing she was listing more responsibilities than her official position required. Elizabeth smiled for the first time that evening. "You're much more qualified than my husband realizes, aren't you?" Before Rachel could respond, Jennifer approached them. "Mrs. Rachel, we're going back home. Are you coming with us?" Rachel looked at Elizabeth, who nodded understandingly. "Go, you must be tired. But can we talk more another day?" "Of course, if you'd like," Rachel replied, surprised by the invitation. During the bus ride home, Rachel reflected on the surreal day she had lived. It began with her being fired and ended with her saving the life of the person who had dismissed her. She had met Stephen's wife, who seemed to be a completely different person from him, and now she faced the reality of being unemployed, with a dependent person at home and bills to pay. When she arrived at the small apartment in the Dilworth neighborhood, she found Mrs. Dorothy sleeping peacefully in the living room armchair with Margaret, the 68-year-old neighbor who helped in emergencies, knitting beside her. "How was she?" Rachel asked softly. "Calm, thank God," Margaret replied, putting away the yarn. "She took her medications correctly, ate dinner well. She asked about you a few times but didn't get agitated." Rachel thanked her and walked Margaret to the door. Then she sat down beside Mrs. Dorothy, watching the serene face of the woman who had become her responsibility, and, in a way, her constant companion. At 73, Mrs. Dorothy still had moments of clarity, especially in the morning, when she sometimes remembered that Rachel was her daughter-in-law and showed gratitude for the care. "Mother Dorothy," Rachel murmured, gently touching her hand. "Today was a very strange day." Mrs. Dorothy opened her eyes slowly, focusing on Rachel with some difficulty. "Rachel, you're here." "Yes, I am. How are you feeling?" "Well, dear, but you look tired. Did you work a lot today?" Rachel smiled sadly. How to explain to someone with Alzheimer's that she had lost her job but at the same time saved a life? How to share worries with someone who sometimes didn't even remember her own name? "It was a different day, Mother Dorothy, but everything is fine now." "You're a good girl, Rachel. My Daniel chose well." Rachel's heart tightened. Lately, Mrs. Dorothy often spoke of Daniel as if he was still alive. Rachel had learned it was better not to contradict her, to avoid causing more confusion. "Thank you, Mother Dorothy. Shall we go to bed? It's late." While helping Mrs. Dorothy with the nighttime routine, giving her medications, making sure she was comfortable, Rachel thought about the next day. She needed to start looking for a job immediately. The savings wouldn't last long, and the expenses for medications and medical care were constant. Already in bed, Rachel took the notebook where she made her notes and wrote down the tasks for the next day. Update resume, print copies, look for job openings in newspapers and websites, call former co-workers. But her mind kept going back to the events of the day. The image of Stephen collapsed on the floor, the feeling of performing chest compressions, the conversation with Elizabeth. There was something about Stephen's wife that intrigued her. The woman seemed genuinely interested in her story, in understanding her situation. Very different from the coldness Stephen had always shown. Rachel wondered if Elizabeth would talk to her husband about the conversation they had, if Stephen would find out about her nursing background. The next morning, Rachel woke up to Mrs. Dorothy calling her from the kitchen. It was one of the good days, when she remembered some basic routines. Rachel found her trying to make coffee, an activity she sometimes managed to do on her own. "Good morning, Mother Dorothy. Did you sleep well?" "I did, dear. But you were restless at night. Did you have a bad dream?" Rachel was surprised. In her moments of clarity, Mrs. Dorothy sometimes showed a sharp perception of the emotional state of those around her. "It wasn't a bad dream, Mother Dorothy. I'm just worried about some work things." "Work is important, but health is more important," said Mrs. Dorothy, with a wisdom that sometimes emerged even amid the confusion of the disease. "My Daniel always used to say that." After breakfast, while Mrs. Dorothy watched her favorite talk show, Rachel tried to organize her papers for the job search. That's when the phone rang. "Hello?" "Rachel, it's Elizabeth Morgan." Rachel felt a jolt of surprise. "Good morning, Mrs. Elizabeth. How is Mr. Stephen?" "Better, thank you. The doctors said he can have visitors this afternoon, and I was wondering if you could come with me to the hospital." "I don't know if that's a good idea," Rachel hesitated. "He fired me yesterday, and I wouldn't want to cause any awkwardness." "Rachel, my husband needs to know the truth about what happened. He needs to meet the person who saved his life, and I have a proposal to make to you." Curiosity overcame hesitation. Rachel agreed to meet Elizabeth at the hospital at 3 in the afternoon. She spent the rest of the morning getting things ready for Mrs. Dorothy, asking Margaret again to stay with her for a few hours. At the hospital, Rachel found Elizabeth at the reception, elegant as always, but with a determined expression she hadn't noticed the day before. "Thank you for coming," Elizabeth said, leading her through the corridors. "Before we go up to see Stephen, I need to tell you a few things." They sat down in the hospital cafeteria, and Elizabeth began to speak. "My husband is a good man, Rachel, but he sometimes gets carried away by business pressure and loses sight of what really matters. Last night, while he was sedated, I spoke at length with the doctor about what you did." Rachel listened without interrupting. "The doctor explained to me that CPR is a procedure that can save lives, but it needs to be done correctly. An untrained person can cause more harm than good. You not only knew what to do, but you did it perfectly." "I learned out of necessity," Rachel said. Caring for Dorothy forced me to learn many things. And that's exactly what I want to talk about. Yesterday you told me about your nursing background, your experience, about how you juggle everything. I couldn't stop thinking about it all night." Elizabeth paused to take a sip of coffee before continuing. "Rachel, have you ever thought about working specifically in the caregiving field? There's a huge demand for qualified professionals to care for the elderly, especially those with special conditions like Alzheimer's." "I've thought about it, but the problem is I'd need to leave Mrs. Dorothy with someone, and I can't afford to pay a caregiver. What if there was a way to balance both things?" Rachel looked at Elizabeth with growing curiosity. "What do you mean?" "I have a proposal to make, but first, I need you to understand our family situation better." Elizabeth explained that she and Stephen had 2 adult children who lived in other cities. Stephen had always been very dedicated to his work, but in recent years he'd become even more rigid and focused only on numbers. She herself had stopped working many years ago to care for the family, but lately she'd been missing a more meaningful purpose. "I admire what you do for your mother-in-law," Elizabeth said. "It requires a lot of love and dedication. And yesterday, seeing how you acted in an emergency, I realized you have a natural calling for caring for people." "Thank you, but I still don't understand where you're going with this." Elizabeth smiled. "I'd like to propose a partnership. I know several families who need qualified caregivers for their elderly relatives, people who can pay well for quality service but have difficulty finding reliable professionals." Rachel felt her heart speed up. "Are you suggesting I start my own business?" "With my initial support, yes. Would you have flexible hours, could bring Mrs. Dorothy when needed, and earn much more than as an office employee?" The offer was tempting, but Rachel felt uncertain. "Mrs. Elizabeth, I have no experience running a business, and I would need start-up capital to... We can solve all that together. But first, let's go up to see Stephen. He needs to hear directly from you what happened yesterday." In the hospital room, Stephen Morgan was awake but visibly weak. When he saw Rachel enter with Elizabeth, his expression showed surprise and what might have been embarrassment. "Rachel," he said in a hoarse voice, "Elizabeth told me that you helped me yesterday." "I just did what anyone would do," Rachel replied, keeping her voice steady but respectful. "No." Stephen shook his head slowly. "Elizabeth explained that you applied medical procedures, that you coordinated everything until the EMS arrived. The doctors said you saved my life." There was a moment of silence in the room. Stephen seemed to be struggling with his words. "I fired you yesterday morning," he continued, "and just hours later you were saving my life. I don't understand why you did it." Rachel looked at him sincerely. "Mr. Stephen, I did it because it was the right thing to do. You needed help, and I had the necessary knowledge. I didn't think about anything else beyond that." Stephen closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was something different in his expression. "Elizabeth told me you have nursing training. Why did you never mention it?" "Because you never asked, and because it wasn't relevant to the work I did at the company." "But it explains why you always organize the health and safety reports so precisely," Stephen murmured, more to himself than to her. Elizabeth approached the bed. "Stephen, Rachel cares for her mother-in-law who has Alzheimer's. That's why she sometimes arrived late. She needs to take the lady to medical appointments and manage her medications." Stephen looked at Rachel with an expression she had never seen before. Perhaps it was understanding, perhaps regret. "Why did you never properly explain this to me?" he asked. "I tried, Mr. Stephen, but you always said personal problems shouldn't affect work." Stephen remained silent for a long moment. Rachel could see he was processing information, perhaps seeing the situation from a different perspective for the first time. "Rachel," he said finally, "I would like to offer you your job back." Rachel felt a mix of relief and hesitation. "Thank you, Mr. Stephen, but—" "With flexible hours," he added quickly, "so you can care for your mother-in-law without affecting work." It was exactly what Rachel had dreamed of months ago. But now, with Elizabeth's proposal still echoing in her mind, she felt torn. She needed time to think. "May I give you an answer tomorrow?" she asked. "It's an important decision, and I'd like to talk with my mother-in-law." Stephen nodded, and Elizabeth walked Rachel to the hospital exit. In the elevator, Elizabeth spoke softly. "You don't have to choose between one option and the other, Rachel. The proposal I made still stands. Think it over carefully." That evening, Rachel spoke with Mrs. Dorothy during one of her lucid moments. She explained about the possibility of returning to work with flexible hours and also about the idea of working as an independent caregiver. "What is your heart telling you, dear?" asked Mrs. Dorothy with that simple wisdom that sometimes emerged. "My heart is confused, Mother Dorothy. The job is secure, but the other option might be more rewarding." "You enjoy caring for people, Rachel. I see that every day. You have a gift for this. But I'm also afraid to take the risk and have it not work out." Mrs. Dorothy held Rachel's hand. "My Daniel always said that the best things in life come when we have the courage to try new things." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, the next morning Rachel woke up with a decision made. She first called Elizabeth, thanking her for the proposal and asking for more details about how the partnership would work. Then she called Stephen at the hospital, thanking him for the job offer but explaining that she had decided to pursue a different path. "I understand," said Stephen, his voice sounding less surprised than Rachel expected. "Elizabeth told me about the proposal she made to you. I think it's a wise decision." "You're not upset?" "Rachel, you saved my life. How could I be upset? Besides, Elizabeth is right when she says you have a talent for caring for people. It would be selfish of me to try to keep you just organizing papers." By the end of that week, Stephen was discharged from the hospital, but Morgan and Associates was facing problems. During the days he was hospitalized, some financial irregularities had begun to surface. Brian, the head accountant, seemed nervous and evasive when questioned about certain bank transactions. Elizabeth had started working with Rachel on structuring the new business. They met every afternoon at Elizabeth's house, an elegant residence in the Myers Park neighborhood, planning every detail. Rachel brought Mrs. Dorothy along, who seemed to enjoy the well-kept gardens and Elizabeth's company. "You have an impressive natural organization," commented Elizabeth, watching Rachel structure cost spreadsheets and service schedules. Stephen didn't know what a treasure he had in the company. It was true. Rachel had discovered she had administrative skills she had never fully explored. She created service protocols, assessment forms, and medical tracking systems that even impressed the doctors Elizabeth consulted to validate the project. 2 weeks later, Stephen showed up at Elizabeth's house one afternoon when Rachel was there working. He looked worried and tired. "Elizabeth, I need to talk to both of you," he said, greeting Rachel respectfully. They sat in the living room, with Mrs. Dorothy dozing in an armchair by the window. "I've discovered we have serious problems at the company," Stephen began. "Brian was embezzling money to cover gambling debts, and his secretary Michelle was helping him forge documents." Rachel felt a chill. She had always noticed small inconsistencies in the report she organized, but never imagined they could indicate something so serious. "When I discovered all this, I realized you always organized the files in a way that would have made it easier to detect these irregularities," Stephen continued, looking at Rachel. "If I had paid attention to your work, instead of focusing only on punctuality, maybe this would have been discovered much sooner." "What kind of irregularities?" asked Rachel, her professional curiosity piqued. Stephen explained that Brian had created fictitious suppliers, overcharged for services, and manipulated bank accounts. The situation was causing serious financial problems for the company, and he needed help organizing a full audit. "I know you're focused on the new project with Elizabeth," he said, "but you're the only person I can trust to help me organize the documents for the audit. It would be temporary work, but well paid." Rachel looked at Elizabeth, who nodded encouragingly. "I can work part-time helping with the audit and part-time developing our project," Rachel proposed, "as long as the hours are flexible to care for Mrs. Dorothy." Stephen agreed immediately. In the following days, Rachel dove into the files at Morgan & Associates with a completely new perspective. Now she wasn't just organizing documents, but investigating patterns, identifying inconsistencies, building a complex puzzle of evidence. What she discovered was even more serious than Stephen had imagined. Brian wasn't just diverting money to pay gambling debts. He had created a sophisticated scheme that also involved some of the firm's clients, offering discounts on services in exchange for bribes. "How did you manage to map all this out so quickly?" asked Stephen, observing the detailed spreadsheets Rachel had prepared. "It's a matter of systematic organization," Rachel explained. "Each document tells part of the story. When you organize everything chronologically and cross-reference the information, the patterns start to appear." Stephen shook his head in admiration. "I wasted 4 years having you as an employee and never realized your true abilities." The investigation revealed that Michelle, the secretary, had started participating in the scheme because she was facing personal financial problems. She had lost her husband the previous year and was struggling to support 2 young children alone. Brian had taken advantage of her vulnerability to co-opt her. Rachel felt divided upon discovering this information. On one hand, what Michelle had done was wrong and had harmed the company. On the other hand, she understood the desperation of a mother trying to care for her children alone. "I think we should talk to Michelle before making any drastic decisions," Rachel suggested to Stephen. "Maybe there's a way to resolve this without completely destroying her life." Stephen hesitated. His first reaction was to fire them both and press criminal charges, but his recent experience had changed his perspective on many things. "Do you have any specific suggestions?" he asked. "What if we offer Michelle the chance to repay the money through community service or payroll deduction and require her to undergo financial counseling? For Brian, who was the mastermind of the scheme, the consequences would have to be more serious." Elizabeth, who had followed the entire discussion, smiled proudly. "Rachel, you have an impressive sense of justice. You can see people as complex human beings, not just as villains or heroes." The conversation with Michelle was emotional. She confessed everything through tears, explaining that she had started participating in the scheme because Brian had convinced her it was just a temporary loan that would be repaid. When she realized the extent of the problem, she was already too involved to get out. "I know I did wrong," said Michelle, sobbing. "But I was desperate. The bills for my youngest son's asthma treatment were suffocating me. Brian said it would just be once." Rachel looked at Stephen, who seemed to be fighting an internal battle. The old version of him would have dismissed Michelle immediately, but his recent experience had shown him the value of trying to understand people's motivations before judging them. "Michelle," Stephen said finally, "what you did was serious and harmed the company greatly. But Rachel helped me understand that people make mistakes for complex reasons." He paused to gather his thoughts before continuing. "I'm going to offer you a second chance, but with clear conditions. You will repay all the money through payroll deduction over 2 years. You will undergo financial counseling. And you'll work directly with me to implement new internal controls so this never happens again." Michelle looked at him in disbelief. You're not firing me?" "Rachel taught me that second chances can transform people. Let's see if she's right." With Brian, the situation was different. As he had been the mastermind behind the scheme and had involved a vulnerable employee, Stephen decided to fire him and demand full restitution. Brian tried to negotiate, but Stephen was unyielding. "You abused your leadership position," Stephen said, "and involved a colleague who was going through hardships. That is unforgivable." With the company situation stabilized, Rachel could focus more time on developing the new business with Elizabeth. They had decided to name the venture Caring Hearts and already had 3 clients interested in their services. The first client was Mrs. Eleanor, an 82-year-old lady who lived alone and needed daily companionship. Rachel visited her one Saturday morning, bringing Mrs. Dorothy along so the 2 elderly women could meet. "You seem very young to be a professional caregiver," said Mrs. Eleanor, studying Rachel with a keen eye. "I learned by caring for my mother-in-law," Rachel explained. "And I took a nursing course a few years ago." "And why did you bring your mother-in-law here?" Rachel smiled. "Because I think it's important for you two to meet. If I'm going to care for you, Mrs. Dorothy will sometimes come with me. And also because she enjoys meeting new people on days when she's feeling well." Mrs. Eleanor observed Mrs. Dorothy, who was sitting calmly in a chair, looking out the window. "Does she have Alzheimer's?" "Yes, for 3 years now. But she still has moments of clarity, especially in the morning." "My mother had Alzheimer's," said Mrs. Eleanor, approaching Mrs. Dorothy. "It's a difficult disease for the whole family." What happened next surprised Rachel. Mrs. Eleanor sat down beside Mrs. Dorothy and began talking with her about the plants in the garden. Mrs. Dorothy responded lucidly, even smiling a few times. "Does she like plants?" asked Mrs. Eleanor. "She loved gardening when she was younger," Rachel replied. "Sometimes she still remembers that." "Then it's settled," said Mrs. Eleanor. "You're our caregiver, and you can bring your mother-in-law whenever you want. This house has enough garden for 2 ladies to admire." In the following months, the Caring Hearts business grew naturally. Rachel developed a unique care method that involved not only medical and physical attention, but also social and emotional stimulation for the elderly. Mrs. Dorothy became a sort of involuntary co-therapist, as her presence cheered up other seniors and created a more familiar, less institutional environment. Elizabeth proved to be an exceptional partner. She handled all the administrative and commercial aspects, allowing Rachel to focus on what she did best, caring for people. Additionally, Elizabeth had started studying Alzheimer's and other age-related diseases, becoming a valuable source of information and support. Stephen, in turn, had changed significantly. The heart attack experience and the discovery of the fraud at the company had forced him to rethink many of his attitudes. He began implementing more humane policies at Morgan & Associates, offering flexible hours for employees with family responsibilities and creating a more welcoming work environment. "Rachel taught me that people are more productive when they feel understood and respected," he commented to Elizabeth one evening. "I spent years focused only on numbers, losing sight of the human factor." "And are you happier now?" asked Elizabeth. "Much more. The company is running better than ever, and I sleep better at night knowing I'm treating people with dignity." One day, Mrs. Dorothy had a more severe episode. She woke up confused, didn't recognize Rachel, and was agitated, trying to leave the house to find Daniel. Rachel had learned to handle these situations, But this time the episode lasted longer than usual. Elizabeth showed up at the house when Rachel called asking for help. She found Rachel exhausted, trying to calm Mrs. Dorothy, who insisted on not taking her medication. "Let me try," Elizabeth said softly. She approached Mrs. Dorothy with complete calm. "Mrs. Dorothy, good afternoon. I'm Elizabeth, Rachel's friend." "Rachel? Who's Rachel?" "I need to find my husband, Daniel," said Mrs. Dorothy, agitated. "Daniel is at work, Mrs. Dorothy. He asked me to look after you until he gets back. But first you need to take the medicine he left." To Rachel's surprise, Mrs. Dorothy calmed down and took the medication without resistance. Within minutes, she had settled down and fallen asleep in the armchair. "How did you manage that?" Rachel asked, amazed. "Sometimes it's better to enter their world than to try to bring them into ours," Elizabeth explained. "I learned that from reading about the disease. Contradicting can cause more distress." That evening, the two talked at length about the challenges of caring for people with Alzheimer's. Rachel realized that Elizabeth had become much more than a business partner. She was a true friend, someone who shared not only the successes but also the daily difficulties. "Elizabeth, can I ask you a personal question?" said Rachel. "Of course. Why did you become so interested in this project? You could be doing anything else." Elizabeth was thoughtful for a moment. "Because for years I felt useless, Rachel. My children grew up, my husband was always focused on work, and I didn't know what my purpose was. When I saw you caring for Mrs. Dorothy with so much love and dedication, I realized that was what I wanted to do. Help people take care of each other. And Stephen supports this. Completely. He says he's never seen me so fulfilled. And it's true. Every elderly person we manage to help, every family that finds peace through our work, that makes me feel alive again." The business continued to grow. Within 6 months, they were already serving 12 clients, with a waiting list. Rachel had hired 2 assistants, also with nursing training, and Elizabeth had structured a training system to standardize care. But the real test came when Mrs. Eleanor, their first client, had a fall at home. Rachel was there at the time and quickly assessed the situation. There were no apparent fractures, but Mrs. Eleanor was in pain and frightened. "Mrs. Eleanor, I'm going to call an ambulance, but I want you to stay calm. It doesn't seem to be anything serious," said Rachel, checking her vital signs. "I don't want to go to the hospital alone," said Mrs. Eleanor, squeezing Rachel's hand. "You won't go alone. I'm coming with you." At the hospital, Rachel accompanied all the procedures, ensuring that Mrs. Eleanor received proper care. The doctors confirmed there were no fractures, just a bruise, but they praised Rachel for her accurate initial assessment and for keeping the patient calm. "Are you a relative of hers?" asked a doctor. "I'm her professional caregiver," Rachel replied. "Well, she's lucky. We rarely see caregivers so dedicated and competent." When they returned home, Mrs. Eleanor held Rachel's hand. "Rachel, you saved my life today. Not just because you helped me physically, but because you didn't leave me alone in a moment of fear." "It's part of my job, Mrs. Eleanor." "No, Rachel. A job is what you get paid to do. Love is what you do beyond what you're paid for. And you do everything with love." Those words touched Rachel deeply. She realized she had found much more than a means of living. She had discovered her true calling. That evening, she shared the experience with Mrs. Dorothy, who was having one of her good days. "Mother Dorothy, today I understood that I've found what I really want to do with my life." "Caring for people?" asked Mrs. Dorothy with a lucid smile. "Yes, and you know what's most amazing? It all started because I was taking care of you. If it weren't for that, I would never have learned so much about first aid, never have saved Stephen's life, never have met Elizabeth." "Things happen for a reason, dear," said Mrs. Dorothy with that simple wisdom that sometimes emerged. "My Daniel used to say that God uses difficult situations to teach us important things." Rachel smiled, remembering how it all began. The delays that made her lose her job, Stephen's heart attack, the conversation with Elizabeth. Each event that at the time seemed like a tragedy had turned out to be a step towards something better. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. 1 year after the incident that changed everything, Rachel was organizing a small celebration at the company Morgan and Associates. Stephen had decided to pay tribute to the first anniversary of his recovery but also to celebrate the positive changes that had happened in the company. "When I think about everything that happened this past year," Stephen said to the group of gathered employees, "I realize that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as problems." Rachel was present with Mrs. Dorothy, who had liked the idea of returning to the office where her daughter-in-law had worked. Elizabeth was by her side, radiant with the success of Caring Hearts. Michelle, who had become one of the company's most dedicated employees, smiled proudly at having received a second chance. "Rachel," Stephen continued, "you taught me that true leadership isn't just about efficiency and punctuality. It's about understanding people, valuing their unique qualities, and creating an environment where everyone can give their best." He paused to take a sip of water before continuing. "You saved my life in 2 ways. First, physically, when you had the courage and knowledge to help me during the heart attack. Second, professionally, when you helped me uncover the fraud that could have destroyed this company. But more important than that," Elizabeth said, taking the floor, "Rachel taught us that second chances can transform lives. She could have held a grudge for being unfairly fired, but she chose to act with generosity and compassion." Mrs. Dorothy, who was having a particularly lucid day, stood up with some difficulty. Rachel approached to support her, but the elderly woman gestured that she wanted to speak. "I would like to say a few words," said Mrs. Dorothy, surprising everyone with the clarity of her voice. The office fell into a respectful silence. "Rachel has been my daughter-in-law for 15 years. For the past 3 years since this illness came into my life, she has been my guardian angel. She could have put me in a nursing home, but she chose to care for me with love." Mrs. Dorothy looked around the room before continuing. "You saw her save your Stephen's life, but I see her save my life every day, with patience when I'm confused, with affection when I'm scared, with strength when I'm weak." Tears began to stream down Rachel's face. "My son Daniel chose well when he married her," concluded Mrs. Dorothy, "and you were blessed when she decided to become part of your lives." The applause was warm and emotional. Stephen approached Rachel and greeted her respectfully. "Rachel, I'd like to make an official proposal," he said. "Morgan & Associates is expanding its services. We want to create a humanized management consulting division, helping other companies implement more compassionate policies. Would you like to lead this project?" Rachel looked at Elizabeth, who nodded encouragingly. "It would be part-time work," Stephen added, "so you can continue with Caring Hearts and care for Mrs. Dorothy." "I accept," Rachel replied, smiling, "as long as Mrs. Dorothy can come with me when necessary." "Always," Stephen assured. "In fact, she's officially hired as our senior life wisdom advisor." Everyone laughed, including Mrs. Dorothy, who seemed to understand the joke perfectly. In the following months, Rachel divided her time between 3 activities that fulfilled her deeply. In the morning, she cared for Mrs. Dorothy and the clients of Caring Hearts alongside Elizabeth. In the afternoon, she worked at Morgan & Associates developing corporate humanization programs. In the evening, she dedicated herself to studying more about geriatric care and people management. The humanized management program at Morgan & Associates became an unexpected success. Several companies from Charlotte sought the consultancy to implement more flexible and compassionate policies. Rachel discovered she had a talent for teaching managers to see their employees as whole people, not just productive resources. "What impresses me most about you," said an HR director during one of Rachel's lectures, "is that you speak from personal experience. You've lived both sides of the situation." "That's true," Rachel replied. "I know what it's like to be a dedicated employee who doesn't feel valued, and I've also seen how a manager can completely change their perspective when they understand people's circumstances." During one of these lectures, Rachel met Jennifer Davis, an executive from a technology company facing high turnover rates. "My employees are leaving and I don't understand why," said Jennifer. "The salaries are competitive, the benefits are good, but people still don't stay." Rachel asked a few questions about the company culture, schedules, leave policies, flexibility for family matters. She quickly identified the problem. "Jennifer, you're offering material benefits, but you're not offering human understanding. People need to feel seen and valued as individuals, not just as producers." "How can I change that?" Start by talking individually with each employee. Not about work, but about their lives. Find out what their personal challenges, aspirations, and fears are. Then adapt the company policies to accommodate people's real needs. Jennifer implemented Rachel's suggestions, and within 6 months, turnover had decreased dramatically. More importantly, productivity had increased because people felt genuinely cared for. Rachel transformed our company, Jennifer commented to Elizabeth during a visit to Caring Hearts. But more than that, she transformed me as a person. I learned to see my employees as complex human beings, not as numbers on a spreadsheet. Rachel's professional success was rewarding, but the most precious moments remained those she spent with Mrs. Dorothy. The illness was progressing, and the episodes of confusion were becoming more frequent. But during lucid intervals, Mrs. Dorothy showed immense pride in what Rachel was achieving. "Rachel, you've grown so much," she said one morning, watching her daughter-in-law prepare for a lecture. "When Daniel married you, I saw a sweet and dedicated young woman. Now I see a strong woman who is changing the lives of many people. Mrs. Dorothy, everything I am today, I learned from taking care of you." "No, my dear. You already had that within you. I just helped awaken it." During one of the routine medical checkups, Mrs. Dorothy's geriatrician made an observation that deeply touched Rachel. "Mrs. Rachel, in 15 years of practice, I've rarely seen an Alzheimer's patient so well cared for. Mrs. Dorothy is in her 7th year of the disease, but maintains exceptional quality of life. This is a direct result of the loving care she receives." "Doctor, sometimes I feel guilty because I can't do more for her." "Rachel, you're doing more than many biological children would. Mrs. Dorothy is lucky to have someone like you." Those words reinforced for Rachel that she had chosen the right path. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of worry had been worth it. On a Sunday afternoon, Rachel was in Mrs. Eleanor's garden with Mrs. Dorothy and 2 other clients of Caring Hearts. The 4 ladies were chatting animatedly about plants, old recipes, and memories from their youth. Rachel watched the scene with her heart full of gratitude. Elizabeth arrived with Stephen, who had started occasionally accompanying the visits to better understand the work the 2 women were developing. "Rachel," said Stephen, "may I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Do you regret anything that happened this past year?" Rachel thought for a moment before answering. "I don't regret anything, Stephen. Not the delays that made me lose my job, not being fired, not your heart attack, because all of that brought me here." "To where?" "To discovering my true purpose in life, to finding an amazing partner like Elizabeth, to learning that work can be more than just a means of survival. It can be a way to touch lives." Stephen smiled. "You know what impresses me most about you? You turned every obstacle into an opportunity, every problem into a solution to help other people. Perhaps it's because I learned that our difficulties prepare us to help others going through the same situations," Rachel reflected. "Caring for Mrs. Dorothy taught me about patience and compassion. Being fired taught me about injustice and second chances. Saving your life taught me about courage and purpose." That evening, Rachel was organizing some documents for Caring Hearts when she found a letter she had written to herself on the day she was fired but never sent. It was an outpouring full of sadness and uncertainty about the future. She reread the letter, comparing that desperate Rachel with the confident, fulfilled woman she had become. The transformation was remarkable. From dismissed employee to respected business owner, from invisible person to sought-after speaker, from lonely caregiver to leader of a dedicated team. But the biggest change was in how she saw herself. No longer as a victim of circumstances, but as the protagonist of her own story. No longer as someone who merely reacts to events, but as someone who has the power to positively influence others' lives. Mrs. Dorothy appeared in the living room, walking slowly with her walker. "Rachel, are you still awake?" "I am, Mother Dorothy. I was thinking about some things." "Good things or bad things?" "Good, very good." Mrs. Dorothy sat beside her on the sofa. "You seem happy lately, my dear." "I am happy, Mother Dorothy. I've finally found my place in the world. Your Daniel would be proud of you." Rachel felt her eyes filling with tears. Mrs. Dorothy had mentioned Daniel lucidly, remembering that he had passed away, but recognizing the pride he would feel. "Thank you, Mother Dorothy. That means a lot to me. You've given me a dignified life even with this terrible disease, Rachel. You've given me love, care, respect. You never made me feel like a burden. Because you never were a burden. You were my life teacher." That early morning, Rachel stayed awake thinking about how unpredictable life is. A year and a half earlier, she was just an office worker struggling to balance work and family responsibilities. Now she was the owner of a thriving business, a respected consultant, and most importantly, a person who had found her true calling. The next morning, she received a call that would once again change the course of her story. It was Dr. Henry Thompson, director of a large geriatric hospital in Charlotte. "Rachel, I heard about your work through several doctors who treat your clients. I'd like to talk to you about a proposal." Intrigued, Rachel scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon. Dr. Henry explained that the hospital was developing a pioneering program for humane home care for the elderly and wanted her to lead the project. "It would be a job with great responsibility," he explained. "You would coordinate a team of 15 caregivers, develop care protocols, and be responsible for training other professionals. Doctor, I'm honored by the proposal, but I can't abandon my current commitments." "We're not asking you to. The program would be an expansion of what you already do. You would keep Caring Hearts and your consulting work, but you would also help us bring this care model to more families." The proposal was tempting and frightening at the same time. Rachel asked for time to talk with Elizabeth and Stephen before making a decision. "It's an amazing opportunity," Elizabeth said when Rachel told her about the proposal. "You could impact hundreds of families. But I would have to travel more, give more lectures, be away more often, and Mrs. Dorothy needs more care." Stephen, who was present during the conversation, made an unexpected suggestion. "What if we hired a professional caregiver to help you with Mrs. Dorothy? Someone you would train and supervise yourself?" Rachel hesitated. The idea of leaving Mrs. Dorothy in someone else's care, even partially, made her uneasy. "Rachel," Elizabeth said softly, "you've created such an effective care method that you now have the opportunity to teach others to do the same. Mrs. Dorothy wouldn't be abandoned. She'd be cared for by someone you trained yourself." After much reflection, Rachel accepted the hospital's proposal, but with specific conditions. She would personally choose and train the assistant caregiver for Mrs. Dorothy, maintain her involvement with Caring Hearts, and continue living with her mother-in-law. The chosen caregiver was Amanda, a 26-year-old nursing graduate who had lost her grandmother to Alzheimer's and deeply understood the challenges of the disease. Rachel spent 2 weeks training Amanda in the specific methods of caring for Mrs. Dorothy, her routines, preferences, and particularities. "The most important thing," Rachel explained to Amanda, "is to always treat her with dignity and respect. Even when she's confused, she remains a person with feelings and memories." Amanda proved to be a dedicated learner and quickly developed a caring relationship with Mrs. Dorothy. This reassured Rachel, who was able to accept the new challenge with more confidence. The hospital program launched 3 months later with significant local media coverage. Rachel was interviewed on television and radio programs, sharing her story and explaining the importance of humane care for the elderly. "The difference between caring and just providing assistance," she explained in one interview, "is love. When you care with love, you don't just attend to the person's physical needs, but you also nurture their soul." The reporter asked about her motivation for working in the geriatric field. "It all started when I needed to care for my mother-in-law with Alzheimer's. Initially, it was a responsibility I took on out of love for my late husband, but I discovered that caring for the elderly fulfilled me in a way I had never experienced before." "And how does your mother-in-law feel about your professional success?" Rachel smiled. In her moments of clarity, she shows a lot of pride. "The other day she told me she was happy because I had found a way to multiply the love I feel for her." The interview touched many viewers. Rachel received hundreds of messages from people sharing similar situations, some asking for advice, others simply thanking her for making them feel understood. One of the messages that moved her the most was from a woman named Barbara from Gastonia, who cared for her father with senile dementia. "Rachel, I watched your interview and cried from start to finish. For 2 years I've been caring for my father alone, and sometimes feel so tired and guilty for thinking I can't handle it. Your story gave me hope and made me realize I'm not alone in this struggle." Rachel decided to personally respond to the most touching messages, offering words of encouragement and practical suggestions. Without realizing it, she had become a reference and source of inspiration for hundreds of families facing similar situations. The success of the hospital program brought new challenges and opportunities. Rachel was invited to give lectures in other cities in North Carolina, participate in geriatric conferences, and even write articles for specialized magazines. But amid all this recognition, she never lost sight of her fundamental priorities. Mrs. Dorothy continued to be her main responsibility, and Caring Hearts remained her dearest project. One particularly difficult afternoon, Mrs. Dorothy had a severe episode of agitation. She didn't recognize Rachel or Amanda, insisted she was lost, and wanted to go home. Rachel cancelled an important meeting at the hospital to stay by her mother-in-law's side. "Rachel," said Amanda, "I can stay with her. You don't need to cancel your appointments." "Amanda, when Mrs. Dorothy is like this, she needs me. Meetings can be rescheduled, but these moments of vulnerability require the presence of the person she trusts most." That afternoon, Rachel stayed by Mrs. Dorothy's side, singing old songs she liked, showing family photos, speaking in a calm and loving voice until the agitation passed. It took 4 hours, but finally, Mrs. Dorothy calmed down and fell asleep. "How do you have so much patience?" asked Amanda, admiringly. "Because I understand that behind the confusion and agitation, there's a frightened person who doesn't understand what's happening to her. If I were her, I would want someone to treat me with that patience." That night, Stephen called to find out why Rachel had missed the meeting. "Mrs. Dorothy had an episode and needed special care," Rachel explained. "You could have had the caregiver handle that." "Stephen, Amanda is excellent, but there are times when Mrs. Dorothy specifically needs me. It's a responsibility I took on voluntarily and will never completely outsource." There was a pause on the line before Stephen responded. "Rachel, you teach me something new every day about commitment and priorities. The meeting can wait. Mrs. Dorothy cannot." 2 years after the start of her new life, Rachel was organizing a special celebration. It was Mrs. Dorothy's 75th birthday, and she wanted it to be a memorable day. She invited all the people who had become important in their lives: Elizabeth and Stephen, Amanda, Jennifer from the office, Mrs. Eleanor and other clients of Caring Hearts, Dr. Henry from the hospital, and even Michelle, who had become a close friend. "Mrs. Dorothy may not remember all the details later," Rachel explained to Elizabeth, "but during the party she'll feel loved and valued. And that's what matters." The party was held in Elizabeth's garden, decorated with Mrs. Dorothy's favorite flowers. Rachel had prepared all her mother-in-law's favorite dishes, including a cornbread cake she always requested for birthdays. When Mrs. Dorothy saw the decorations and all the gathered people, her eyes shone with joy. She was having a particularly good day, recognizing most faces and actively participating in conversations. "Rachel," she said, holding her daughter-in-law's hand, "you did all this for me?" "Of course, Mother Dorothy. You deserve every celebration in the world." "I don't deserve such a wonderful daughter-in-law. We're both lucky to have each other." During the party, Stephen made a special toast. 2.5 years ago, I was a man focused only on efficiency and profits. Rachel taught me there's something far more valuable: the ability to touch lives and make a difference for others. He looked directly at Rachel before continuing. "Rachel transformed not just my business perspective, but my life perspective. She showed me that true success is measured by how much love we spread in the world." Elizabeth spoke next. "Rachel gave me a purpose I didn't know I was looking for. Through her, I discovered that aging isn't just about accumulating years, but about accumulating wisdom and opportunities to serve others." Mrs. Eleanor, who was present in a wheelchair, also wanted to speak. "Rachel isn't just my caregiver. She's my friend, my companion, and my example of how to live generously." The words deeply moved Rachel, But what Mrs. Dorothy said at the end touched her most profoundly. When my son Daniel married Rachel, I thought I was gaining a daughter-in-law. Now I realize I gained a daughter who loves me unconditionally and turned the most difficult years of my life into ones filled with dignity. That evening, after everyone had left and Mrs. Dorothy was sleeping peacefully, Rachel sat on the porch reflecting on the journey she'd taken. 3 years earlier, she was an invisible employee, struggling to balance work and family responsibilities without recognition or growth prospects. Today, she was the owner of a thriving business, a respected consultant, coordinator of an innovative hospital program, and most importantly, someone who had found her life's purpose. But what made her proudest wasn't the professional successes. It was knowing she'd provided Mrs. Dorothy with a dignified and loving old age. It was having transformed her personal pain into a healing instrument for other families. It was having proven to herself that it's possible to find meaning and fulfillment even in the most challenging circumstances. Rachel picked up the phone and called Elizabeth. "Elizabeth, are you sleeping?" "No, I was thinking about the party. It was wonderful." "Elizabeth, I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For seeing potential in me that I didn't see myself, for believing I could be more than just an office worker, for helping me build something meaningful." "Rachel, you don't need to thank me. You transformed my life as much as I transformed yours." "How so?" "Before meeting you, I felt useless, without purpose. You gave me the opportunity to use my life experience for something truly important. You gave me the chance to make a difference." They talked for another hour, planning new projects, discussing ways to expand Caring Hearts, and dreaming about the future. Rachel hung up with her heart full of gratitude for the extraordinary people life had placed in her path. In the following months, Rachel faced one of the most challenging periods since the beginning of her new life. Mrs. Dorothy began experiencing health complications that required more intensive medical care. She was hospitalized twice in 1 month, and Rachel split her time between the hospital, her professional commitments, and constant worry about her mother-in-law's well-being. During one of these hospital stays, Rachel slept at the hospital for 3 consecutive nights, refusing to leave Mrs. Dorothy alone. Amanda offered to stay, but Rachel insisted on remaining. "Rachel, you need to rest," said Dr. Morgan, the geriatrician overseeing Mrs. Dorothy's care. "You can't take care of someone else if you don't take care of yourself first." "Doctor, I know I need to rest, but she feels more at ease when I'm around. In her moments of confusion, my voice is the only one she still recognizes. I understand your dedication, but you have professional responsibilities too. Many families depend on your work." That night, Rachel reflected on the doctor's words. It was true that her absence was affecting other commitments. The hospital program needed her attention, Caring Hearts had clients who relied on her, and several lectures had been cancelled. Elizabeth appeared at the hospital the next morning with a proposal. "Rachel, you need to learn to delegate without feeling guilty. Amanda is competent. I can take on more responsibilities at Caring Hearts, and Stephen can temporarily cover some of your functions at the hospital." "Elizabeth, I can't abandon Mrs. Dorothy at a time like this." "Nobody's talking about abandonment. We're talking about smart organization so you can care for her without harming everything you've built." Rachel resisted initially, but gradually realized Elizabeth was right. She organized a rotation schedule where she spent nights at the hospital but delegated some responsibilities during the day. Amanda stayed with Mrs. Dorothy in the mornings, Elizabeth took over less critical meetings, and Stephen coordinated some hospital program activities. Mrs. Dorothy recovered from the hospitalization, but the event served as a wake-up call for Rachel about the importance of balance. She couldn't continue trying to do everything alone indefinitely. It was during this period that Rachel received an unexpected call from Atlanta. It was Dr. Amanda Roberts, director of a research institute on aging, inviting her to lead a national project on personalized home care. "Rachel, your work in Charlotte has caught the attention of professionals across the country. We want you to develop a national home care protocol that can be implemented in different regions of the United States." The proposal was extraordinary, but would require Rachel to travel frequently and take on even greater responsibilities. She explained her situation with Mrs. Dorothy and the limitations this imposed. "I completely understand," said Dr. Roberts. "In fact, your dedication to your mother-in-law is part of what makes you so qualified for this project. You practically understand what it means to care for someone with love and commitment." They negotiated a flexible arrangement where Rachel would participate in the project while maintaining her base in Charlotte, with scheduled trips and always with the possibility of cancellation in case of family emergencies. Rachel accepted the challenge, but this time with a fundamental difference. She had learned to create a solid support network. Amanda was fully trained to care for Mrs. Dorothy. Elizabeth could manage Caring Hearts independently, and Stephen had become a true partner in the hospital program. The national project was launched 6 months later at an event in Washington, D.C., that brought together gerontologists, health managers, and caregivers from across the country. Rachel was the keynote speaker, sharing her story and presenting the compassionate care protocol she had developed. "Compassionate care isn't just a technique," she explained to the audience. "It's a philosophy that recognizes the inherent dignity of every person, regardless of their physical or mental condition." After the presentation, Rachel was approached by dozens of professionals who wanted to learn more details about her methodology. Among them was Caroline Bennett, a nurse from Miami who cared for her mother with dementia. "Rachel, your talk completely changed my perspective. I was focused only on medical procedures, but you showed me I need to care for the whole person, not just the illness." Conversations like this reinforced for Rachel that her work was truly making a difference in the lives of real people. Every method she had developed while caring for Mrs. Dorothy was now being multiplied through hundreds of professionals across the country. Back in Charlotte, Rachel found Mrs. Dorothy well cared for and seemingly happy. Amanda had followed all the routines to the letter, and Elizabeth had visited every day, bringing fresh flowers and having long conversations with the elderly woman. "How has she been?" asked Rachel, watching Mrs. Dorothy sleeping peacefully. "She asked for you several times," replied Amanda, "but didn't get agitated. I think she's learning to trust me too." "And how did you feel caring for her alone for so long?" "I felt very responsible, but also very affectionate. Mrs. Dorothy is a special person. I can understand why you love her so much." That evening, Rachel had a long conversation with Mrs. Dorothy about the trip and the national project. Even with her advanced illness, Mrs. Dorothy managed to understand the importance of her daughter-in-law's work. "You're helping many families, aren't you, dear?" "I'm trying, Mother Dorothy. My Daniel would be so proud. You took the pain of caring for me and turned it into joy for other people." Those words deeply touched Rachel. That was exactly what had happened. The challenge of caring for Mrs. Dorothy, which initially seemed like a heavy burden, had transformed into fuel for a life mission. On the 3rd anniversary of Stephen's heart attack, Morgan and Associates organized a special celebration. Stephen wanted to mark not only his recovery, but the positive transformations that had happened in the company and in the lives of everyone involved. 3 years ago, Stephen told the group of employees and guests gathered, "I was a man who measured success only in financial numbers. Rachel taught me that true success is measured in transformed lives." He paused to look at Rachel, who was sitting next to Mrs. Dorothy and Elizabeth. "Rachel not only saved my life physically, she taught me that a company can be profitable and compassionate at the same time, that efficiency and compassion aren't opposing concepts." Michelle, who had become one of the company's most respected employees, also wanted to speak. "Rachel gave me a second chance when I needed it most. She showed me that mistakes can be corrected when there's genuine willingness to change." Jennifer, now promoted to administrative assistant, added, "Rachel has always been an example of dedication and honesty. Even when she was unfairly fired, she maintained her integrity and generosity." The most emotional moment of the evening came when Stephen made an unexpected announcement. "Rachel, I want to formalize something that already happens in practice. You are now a permanent consultant at Morgan & Associates in corporate humanization, with profit sharing and full autonomy to develop projects. But more important than that, I want you to know you're part of our family." The emotional recognition was deeply gratifying for Rachel, But what made her proudest was seeing how every person present had grown and evolved over the past 3 years. Later that evening, Rachel was helping Mrs. Dorothy get ready for bed when the elderly woman asked a question that surprised her. "Rachel, are you happy?" "What do you mean, Mrs. Dorothy? You take care of so many people, work so hard, have so many responsibilities. I want to know if you're truly happy." Rachel thought carefully before answering. "You know, Mrs. Dorothy, 3 years ago, I thought happiness was keeping a job and paying the bills. Today I've discovered that happiness is having a purpose greater than yourself." "And what is your purpose?" "To care for the people I need to care for, starting with you, and to use everything I've learned to help other families care better for one another." Mrs. Dorothy smiled with that clarity that sometimes emerged. "So you've found your place in the world." "I have, Mrs. Dorothy, and it all started because I needed to care for you." In the following months, Rachel faced new challenges as Mrs. Dorothy entered the more advanced stage of Alzheimer's. Communication became more difficult, moments of clarity grew rarer, and physical care became more intensive. But Rachel had learned to find beauty even in the most difficult moments. When Mrs. Dorothy could no longer form complete sentences, Rachel would talk with her through old songs. When she forgot how to eat by herself, Rachel turned every meal into a moment of affection and patience. "Rachel," said Dr. Morgan during a consultation, "in 40 years of medicine, I've rarely seen a family care for an Alzheimer's patient with such love and dignity. Mrs. Dorothy is privileged." "Doctor, I'm the privileged one. Mrs. Dorothy taught me about unconditional love, about finding joy in small moments, about the importance of human dignity. How do you maintain this positive attitude even in the most difficult situations?" "Because I've understood that caring for someone with love is one of the noblest acts we can perform as human beings. Every day I can provide comfort and dignity for Mrs. Dorothy is a day well lived." Rachel's work continued to expand. The National Protocol for Compassionate Care was being implemented in 12 U.S. states. Caring Hearts had become a reference in North Carolina, and the hospital program served more than 200 families. But regardless of professional recognition, Rachel never lost sight of her fundamental priority. Mrs. Dorothy remained the center of her life, the inspiration for all her work, and the measure of her real success. On a December afternoon, Rachel was in the garden with Mrs. Dorothy, who enjoyed the afternoon sun even without being able to express herself clearly. Elizabeth arrived with news about a new project they'd been invited to develop. "Rachel, the Department of Health wants us to develop a national training program for family caregivers. It would be our biggest project yet." Rachel looked at Mrs. Dorothy, who smiled faintly upon hearing her voice. "Elizabeth, I'll accept any project as long as it doesn't prevent me from continuing to care for her." "I'd never ask that of you. In fact, I want Mrs. Dorothy to be the official inspiration for the project. I want every family caregiver in the United States to know it's possible to care with love and dignity, even in the most challenging circumstances." That night, Rachel reflected on the proposal, while Mrs. Dorothy slept peacefully beside her. In 4 years, she had gone from a dismissed employee to a national reference in compassionate care. She had transformed her personal experience into an instrument of social change. But more important than any professional recognition was the certainty that she had honored Daniel's legacy and provided Mrs. Dorothy with a dignified and loving old age. She had proven to herself that it is possible to find purpose and fulfillment even in the most difficult circumstances. Rachel looked out the window at the garden, where she had spent so many afternoons with Mrs. Dorothy, remembering the first time she had performed CPR on Stephen, the life-changing conversation she had with Elizabeth, all the moments of doubt and all the victories she had achieved. Her story had begun with an unfair dismissal and a spontaneous act of generosity. It had evolved through pain, challenges, discoveries, and growth, and it continued to unfold, with new chapters being written every day, with every life touched, with every family that learned to care with more love and dignity. Rachel knew her journey was far from over. There would be new challenges, new opportunities to serve, new ways to turn difficulties into blessings for others. But she was prepared for everything, strengthened by the experience of having discovered that love multiplied never diminishes. it only grows. Mrs. Dorothy stirred slightly in bed, and Rachel approached to check if she was comfortable. Even in sleep, the elderly woman seemed calm and at peace. Rachel gently touched her face and murmured a silent gratitude for everything that extraordinary woman had taught her about strength, dignity, and unconditional love. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this story and where you're following us from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Rachel made the right decisions throughout her journey? We would love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.